Well, volume is king, that's for sure, but quality of movement, that's also something that it doesn't make any sense to swim 20 kilometers a week if you do not know how to swim freestyle properly.
That Triathlon Show 222. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview Faris al-Sultan, who is the world champion of the Ironman World Championships in Kona from 2005. And since retiring from professional triathlon himself and moving into coaching, he is most well known for coaching Patrick Lange to 2 World Championship titles and 1 third place in Kona. Currently, Faris works with the German Triathlon Federation and is working on bringing up the nation's draft legal success to closer match the successes that they've seen on the long-distance triathlon side. So a great conversation that you are about to hear. But before that, let's thank our sponsors, Precision Hydration, that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Please remember that Precision Hydration has a great blog that is about more than just hydration and nutrition. One thing that they've been writing over the winter is a series of off-season blog posts that features several of their sponsored athletes, including pro triathlete Scott De Philippis, para-triathlete Claire Cashmore, and Olympian Eilish McGolgan. So, and there are others that will be coming out in the next few weeks and will already be published by the time that you listen to this episode. So those have been really interesting. I've enjoyed reading them and get some insights into what different athletes and coaches are doing. And make sure that you read that and other just general endurance training blog posts that they create, because they are good quality articles. But of course, the main business of Precision Hydration is the electrolyte products. So go and take their free online sweat test to find out what the ballpark estimate for your sweat sodium content is. And you can check out their electrolyte supplements that match how you sweat based on that sweat test and get 15% off your order with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow15 on precisionhydration.com. And big thank you to Roka. Roka first got started as a wetsuit manufacturer and then slowly but surely added other products like dry suits and swim skins and so on to their lineup. But their most recent focus point is adding prescription glasses to their offerings. And these prescription glasses have the same sort of technologies and research and development behind them as their performance sunglasses. So anti-slip technology, very lightweight and durable. And you can also customize them, and they have home try-on options. That is for the US only, and the prescription glasses is for the US only. But all the other products like wetsuits, tri-suits, and so on, you can find internationally, and Roka will redirect you to the EU site if you're in Europe, and Australia site, and so on, depending on where you are. You can visit roka.com/TTS to get a 20% discount code for your entire Roka order. So whether you're looking for prescription glasses or triathlon gear and equipment, Roka is the place to go to do your shopping. Without any further ado, here's the interview with Faris al-Sultan. Welcome to That Triathlon Show, Faris. How are you doing this morning?
I'm fine. Thank you very much.
It's great to have you. You're somebody who has been involved in triathlon for a long time as an athlete and a coach at very successful levels in both, obviously. Can you just give a very brief overview there might be listeners that for some reason have not heard of you, but what's the brief bio of yourself?
Well, of course, my claim to fame is the win of the Ironman World Championship in 2005. In the year before that and after that, I was third, and I've had several other top 10 finishes in Kona, and obviously a few Ironman victories. And so I belong to the to the club of the 6 German Ironman Kona champions.
And you coached Patrick Lange to his victories at Kona as well?
Yes. That was an unexpected, but obviously very satisfying success that I've had.
I can imagine. So being involved from when you started, when you were active, and when you won in 2005, and until now, these recent victories of Patrick's, you have probably seen the sport change quite a bit. How do you think it has changed in the almost 20 years since, 15 years? I did math not too good there, but 15 years since you won.
Well, of course, the sport has changed. I did my first triathlon in 1996, and in those 24 years, the sport has changed. It has become more professional, and the amount of professionalism that we have right now is just so far beyond what we've had back in the day. Regarding nutrition, regarding equipment, regarding training. When I started out, I deliberately chose not to work with a coach because I said that, right now, who can coach me? I thought that there is so little knowledge besides, of course, Mark Allen and Dave Scott, and maybe some guys in the US that, I probably wouldn't benefit from anybody because we all do so many mistakes and we know so very little. And obviously that has changed tremendously over the years.
Can you give some examples on each of those sides that you mentioned, training and nutrition, equipment of, equipment is pretty obvious, I guess, but maybe training and nutrition would be interesting to hear the differences between what you did back in the day and what, for example, Patrick has been doing in preparation for his victories.
Well, so regarding nutrition, for example, now we do have the opportunity to take up much more energy because we know exactly how glucose intake works and sugar, or basically sugar intake works. Most athletes nowadays just simply use gels. Back in the day, there was no gel. It was about to be invented, and we were trying with potatoes and bars, and there were athletes that had tremendous problems to make it through an Ironman because they couldn't get their nutrition right. And nowadays we have so many options. So this has changed in the nutrition side. On the training side, there were so many things experienced people could see and could make something out of it, but we did not understand the physiology behind it. What came up in the last 5 to 10 years to a broader audience is everything about the maximum lactate production,
VLA max.
LA max. Yeah. That was never heard of. I've never heard of that throughout my career, but it explains a lot of experiences that I've had seeing other athletes train. And on the equipment side, back in my day, we already had quite solid bikes and we had good wheels. That's not the issue. But what has changed in the last 5 to 10 years was the suits. And the explanation for the super fast cycling times nowadays of the guys is not that they, put on more wattage than we used to do, but it's simply the fact that they have new suits, slight improvement on the bikes and the frames, but in the wheel department there's no change, and obviously there's the chains and the tires have changed and create some advantage, but the main thing is the suits.
Do you think that power meters and the ubiquity of power meters has made a big change in training and or racing? Because I imagine that in 2005, maybe there was one or at most a handful of athletes that might have been using a power meter, and now everybody has them, even though, almost everybody. Some people choose to race without, and which I can understand, but most athletes, as far as I know, still train with them.
Yes, I totally agree, 100%. Back in my day, only pros had power meters, and it was for a kind of an exclusive few. And of course, after the mid 2000s, it has spread, and nowadays everybody has a power meter, and that obviously quantifies your performance so much more accurate, and it's such a great tool to monitor your cycling. So of course, yes, that has changed.
On the training side, if we go a little bit deeper into that, can you give some specific examples of perhaps something that you did, or that other pros did back in the day, that you think that can be seen as maybe a mistake, or something that is done better these days that has changed in that way?
Well, instinctively, or because everything that I apply nowadays in training, I've stolen from somebody else. So, you see somebody do something, and then you think about it, then you try it, and then, you come up with the conclusion, okay, this is good, I'll do it, or, this is not so good, I won't do it. And instinctively, we did a lot of things right. The structure of a hard day and then followed by a long day, basically. So I had, from a very early stage on, I did a lot of things right. I mean, that's to some degree obvious, because otherwise I wouldn't have been successful, because my opponents weren't bad athletes either. So if you do everything wrong, then you probably won't be successful. Some things like, the understanding of weightlifting. I did a lot of weightlifting in my time, but mainly for the upper body. And I wish I did half of the bench pressing I did. I should have replaced with squats and how's it called, and deadlifts. Yeah. And that would have been way more beneficial. And another problem that I've had, I didn't preserve my speed, my lower distance speed. When I realized how crucial that is for, Ironman performance, it already was too late. And so when I refocused on it in a later stage of my career in 2011, I realized how very important that is, and I really, got my act together in 2012 and had another very successful year. Considering the fact that I've had some not so successful years. Back in 2012, I was second at the race in Abu Dhabi, second at Koh Samui, which were both not Ironman or challenge races, but with a significant pro field, as there was a lot of prize money. I won Ironman Klagenfurt, and I was fifth in Kona again, and that was to a large degree because I regained some of the speed that I used to have.
That's very interesting. I talked with Philip Sipe yesterday, actually, and he mentioned the same thing, that speed is something that a lot of people miss when it comes to long distance training, and neglect to maintain that sort of speed that they might have had if they were focusing on shorter distances, but then let go of it, and that is a mistake. So interesting to hear you say that. Do you think that that's something that most of the pro athletes these days are aware of, or do you think that it's still something that is neglected among the long distance pro athletes?
I think that, as I mentioned before, the knowledge about training has increased so much that everybody who works with a coach that has any type of knowledge knows about the importance of it. And something that you often see in racing in an athlete's career is he is most successful when the guys switch from short distance to long distance at their first or second race, where they still have all that speed from short course racing, and they just put on a lot of mileage in a relatively short period of time. They restructure the training a little bit, and then they have great results. And often they are not able to reproduce those performances and at a later stage of their career.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So the next thing that I wanted to ask about is when it comes to the coaching that you did with Patrick, and he's peaking for Kona and managing to be at his absolute best when it mattered the most. Can you go into how you achieved that? Because it seemed quite often that he, even after winning or coming third the first year, that he went into the race as an underdog because of maybe not having had too many exceptional performances leading up to the race. But then when it came to the big race, he was there when it mattered. So how did you achieve that?
Well, one thing is that I tried to maintain like a solid volume. Patrick has never trained a lot of volume. You can't compare him training wise with Jan Frodeno or Marino van Honacker or Reinhard Tissink. They're putting in way more miles than Patrick ever did. But so we put a block at the about 5 to 6 weeks into Kona, and then a 2-week long taper. And throughout the year, he never really tapered. So this was the whole training was structured to give him the perfect freshness after a solid training block at the end of the year. And that worked out quite well. And a few other things that we did is that with Patrick, that I included weightlifting on a regular basis throughout the year. And we did more transition runs. And that was basically it. And, the coaching situation between me and Patrick was that I was never very close all the time. I'm not the coach that is on the side of the pool and taking times. I just structured the training a little bit, and it was kind of the relationship between an older brother and the younger brother. And if you have athletes that are adults and that already know about the sport, that are self-motivated, then this can be an approach, that doesn't work with 16 or 18-year-old guys, because that's a whole different thing. And I was not the guy, to perfect his technique in swimming or in running, or I was, as I mentioned, more like an advisor and structuring. And so this was my role with him. And of course, I made the training plan, but he had to execute it himself. And as I mentioned, the main things that we changed was that obviously more training, more kilometers on the bike, but that was not so difficult because he didn't ride that much, and longer sessions, transition runs, and weightlifting. That was it.
And when you say that he never really tapered during the year, do you think that maybe that was one of the keys to being at his best in Kona, because he just, over many months from January or December to October, he had been building up such a large amount of volume, even though maybe the single individual weeks weren't as big as other athletes. But if other athletes have been doing more racing, they had been doing more tapering and more recovering from races, then in total maybe Patrick did as much or more than many of those athletes. And then after tapering for Kona, that allowed him to express that fitness. Do you think that is a reason that it worked out so well in Kona?
Well, if you have an 8-hour endurance race, to some degree, it's all about the volume. So, and that was so the one thing is obviously it's the volume. If the volume isn't there, you won't be successful. The other thing is I call it the quality of movement. You can call it technique or whatever. So how do you swim? How efficient do you swim? How efficient do you run? How efficient are you on the bike? And the main qualities of Patrick is that his very efficient running. Obviously, everybody that ever saw him running sees that he doesn't need a lot of energy for that. And his good aerodynamics on the bike. He's not pushing big watts. It simply is that with his size and with the way you can put him on the bike, that this is very, very efficient. So these were a few keys for his success. And from a training perspective or from a coaching perspective, I didn't do much magic, and even with my approach, not too many races, not too much stress on the body due to traveling, what you mentioned. But, if anybody looks at his schedule, his training schedule, you'd be surprised how simple it is. And because, it was very basic. And that type of effort wouldn't have been enough if it weren't for his efficient running style and good aerodynamics. An athlete like Jan Frodeno has to work much more, and other athletes have to work much more to produce the same results.
Yeah, that makes sense. But when you said that his volume was low and it was always much lower than Jan's, for example, did you mean before he started working with you, or even after starting working with you? What kind of volume did you build up to with Patrick after he started working with you?
Well, even after we were working together, I won't give you any specific numbers. You can ask Patrick for you to provide with that. But I can tell you it was on the low side of what is possible. I mean, I've seen so many different athletes. An athlete who didn't need a lot of training was Pete Jacobs, for example. It was amazing with how little he could get away. But obviously, guys like Thomas Hellriegel and me and Jan Frodeno, we were doing much more or Marino van Honacker, way more than Patrick ever had to. So it's not all about the volume. There has to be a certain volume, and not all athletes are the same.
Yeah. Okay, that's fair enough. So we know that it's on the lower side for the pros, and I think that gives some good context. So switching gears a little bit, you're now working with the German Triathlon Federation and have taken up a role there in preparation for the Olympics and the short course championships that are on the line. So can you describe a bit more about that role and what your responsibilities there are?
Yeah, that's a difficult question because nobody really knows. I'm called a coach, but I'm not coaching. Officially, my title is like a head coach, but as I mentioned, I do not coach. I work with the individual coaches, which can be, outside our structure. Outside the federation structure or inside the federation structure. because we have some high performance centers that are financed by the government, and athletes train there, but we have athletes that train outside of those structures as well, and train, for example, with an international group or with a different group or whatever. And then we have athletes living and training at those performance centers. And I usually work with those coaches, and I try to provide like a frame, and I'm like an advisor to the individual coaches. But I do not tell any athlete that tomorrow he has to run, let's say, 10 times 1,000 meters or something. As I said, I try to advise and provide some general, framework for it.
Yeah. What is one example you could choose of something that you've advised somebody, and obviously without naming any names, but something that you've seen, that you've suggested that this is maybe something we can improve on in some way, whether it's coaching or the training in general, to the coach, not to the athlete? Just an example of something you've suggested and that has been implemented or is being implemented.
That all types of things. I've had an athlete I recommended to increase the running volume. I've had many other athletes that I strongly recommended to include more weightlifting. Some athletes are recommended to gain some weight and in order to become more healthy. We have other athletes that I recommended to take part in some testing on position, and so, or first of all to get a proper bike fit, and then to have some testing on the track in order to optimize their position. And with other athletes, I advise to reconsider their nutrition. So all different things. Other athletes, have to change, for example, a certain routine in their weightlifting program. We have athletes that are so adapted to their weightlifting athletic program that you're like, okay, you can do this for ages and you won't see any result because you're so adapted to it. If you continue doing that, it's just, you just burn calories and that's it. So there are all types of issues, and and sometimes, of course, these recommendations are followed, and other times not. I recommend coaches, to choose a certain location for the training camp, to avoid another location for a training camp, all sorts of things.
Yep, that's a great list of examples. And what do you think it will take for Germany to be successful at the Olympics or just in general on the short distance scene? Because you're so dominant in long distance that it's mind-blowing, but then it doesn't really seem to translate to short distance, or it isn't. We don't see that corresponding success there at all, where countries like the US and UK and France and Spain seem to be fighting out for the medals on the men's and women's side, and Germany isn't really as much one of the big hitters there.
Yeah, well, we are no longer in the Champions League, obviously. I think we've, not I think, I mean, I know for a fact that the 2016 Olympics were kind of the down point for the German Federation. I mean, we've had huge issues and nomination lawsuit, and only 2 athletes on the girls' side racing. It was kind of the down point, and a very, very huge disappointment for the German Federation and for Triathlon Germany in general. And of course, we have high expectations with our history. And after that, obviously everything was a bit in shambles, and then the federation bosses knew that we need a change, and we have the problem that the long distance is so dominant and attractive So we have several problems, but this is one of the problems, that if you're a kid in Germany, you want to be like Jan Frodeno, Sebastian Kienle, Patrick Lange. These are your role models. So we often have kids that join a triathlon club and become triathletes from a very early age on. That, unfortunately, makes them mediocre swimmers, mediocre runners, and mediocre cyclists. They become triathletes very early on. And what I want to see is I need the 16-year-old swimmer guy that has played soccer twice a week. That's my ideal guy for short course. So we had swimming issues. We simply had issues to find the right guys. And then the federation made mistakes regarding bringing up the second row behind our golden generation of Jan Frodeno, Daniel Unger, Steffen Justus, Mike Petzold, Andreas Rehlert. Those guys were so dominant that for years everybody was neglecting what was behind them because they were there. And the federation and everybody has the tendency to focus on the best ones, which is nice. Everybody wants to be connected to success, but being connected to success shouldn't prevent you from looking for the success for tomorrow. And this has happened, and we wouldn't build our second generation after those guys. And then the selection process is a problem because we often select fast feet and not hard heads, as I call it. So we had athletes that were, if you look back at the history, we had great guys in the juniors and young guys, and especially strong runners, but they couldn't swim or not on the level that you have to have. So there was a problem with the selection process. And so many reasons led up to the problem that we've had, that, we weren't back in the Champions League of triathlon anymore. And since 2017, there's a new high-performance director. There has been a change. The federation brought in me. I've never coached a short course athlete in my whole life. And the federation chose me for the head coach. So obviously they were desperate. And we've had a great increase in performance. That's not due to my genius coaching. That's luck to some degree. But it also shows that the changes that we've done are slowly coming around.
So that brings us nicely to the question of how different is short course racing from long course racing when we consider the demands of taking an Olympic medal versus taking a medal at Kona, and how do you account for that in the role that you have, as you say, not having the experience of coaching short course athletes, but obviously it's something that you have to get familiar with and learn to adapt the advice and the role that you have to these new demands and different demands, as different as they are, although some things are obviously similar. It's still an endurance sport, but can you elaborate on what you think are the differences and similarities?
Well, you mentioned it. It's an endurance sport. And if you look at the physiology behind it, so it's not so different. Of course, there is difference, but it's still a long time endurance event. If you're 2 hours out there, that's long time endurance. So, of course, the swimming is way more important in short course than it is in long course. So athletes usually spend way more time in the pool, and running is more important on short course. Obviously, it's all important at long course as well, but at a different level. At long course, it's all about economy. And it's absolutely not important how fast you are, if how fast you can go when you're on the red line, when you're trying to kill yourself. It's important how fast you can go when you're putting not so much effort in it. That's what it's all about at Ironman. And at Olympic distance, of course, it's all about how fast are you when you're on the red line. And regarding the short course has changed as well. If you look at the short course race in the year 2002, that was a running race where everybody warmed up together. It was a wet run. Nowadays, since 2010, since the Brownlees came, and since the courses have changed, it requires the complete athlete. It has become so technical on the bike at some courses that even if you're a strong cyclist by power, if you don't know how to steer your bike, you're lost. Or you're dangerous and you're a danger to your fellow athletes. So that has changed in the last couple of years, and that was something that the German Federation wasn't also so aware of. They were hit a bit by surprise how deep that impact was. So all those technical aspects, and especially regarding the new things that come up, we have the Super League with the eliminator races and the relay, the mixed team relay race. So it becomes way more important that you are fast in your transitions, and that's simply not so important for a long course guy. So there are some certain aspects in training that have to be more emphasized: running speed, swimming speed, and this ability to overspeed at some phases during the race. All that has to be taken into consideration. Regarding my job, of course, I have a good understanding of what's required. Simply because I have been in the sport for so long. Even I haven't coached a world-class athlete, and I haven't been a world-class short course athlete myself. I did my fair share of short course racing, and so I have a quite solid idea of what's supposed to be happening. But basically, it's also, I'm in to professionalize simply every aspect of our athletes' lives. This, of course, they are young, so you cannot expect a 20-year-old to be as professional as a 28-year-old. And this is also one of my tasks.
In terms of amateur athletes, because this is where I think that maybe like the differences are even smaller between long course and short course, because for amateur athletes that are slower, they're not running a 30-minute 10K, they might be running a 40-minute or a 50-minute 10K off the bike. Would you say, because this is something that I tend to explain to the athletes that I coach, that really a triathlon is an endurance sport no matter what. Yes, you will be doing more volume when training for long distance, but essentially you're basically developing the same skills. It's really not, you shouldn't talk about different sports the way that some people do it when you're comparing Olympic distance versus Ironman, because they are very similar. But on the professional side, as you say, there are similarities, but the differences are a bit bigger there just because of the super fast swim, especially how fast you need to get to the first buoy to get in a good position. And then also you mentioned the bike skills. It becomes much more of a difference between the disciplines, or a bigger discrepancy between the skill set required versus the amateur, for whom it's still mostly about finding a steady pace to go at and not so much race dynamics.
Of course, you're absolutely right. If you want to have a good result on a Olympic distance race and you're an age group athlete, most of your races are anyway non-drafting races. So it's all about a steady power output and not about overspeeding. You simply won't do 25, 30, 50 accelerations on your bike leg of the race. That simply won't happen. And if somebody attacks on the run, you're probably smart enough not to follow it unless it's in the finish tube. So you're absolutely right. At the amateur level, it's simply the distance is longer, and there's no change in the dynamics.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to follow up on, which I think is really interesting that you mentioned earlier about you want a swimmer that has been playing football, for example, and get away from the focus of starting triathlon at a really young age. And I think that is something that has been a trend in many countries, that young kids are starting to do triathlon immediately rather than coming from a swimming background or running background that they used to do, or something completely different like football. And in many ways it might sound, good because they get a longer background in triathlon. But what you're saying is that it's actually not so good, because you maybe end up being like just a generalist and mediocre across the board. And so that's something. How are you trying to change that mentality? Are you just broadening how you search for athletes to bring into the high performance program by not just looking at the triathlon clubs, but also looking at swimming clubs and athletic clubs? Or can you elaborate on that?
Well, obviously, we have like talent transfer projects where we try to find other people that are not already in the system, and especially, of course, in swimming, because it plays such an important role. And obviously, we are envious towards the Americans that have, I don't know, each year 10, 20, 50,000 college swimmers that they can recruit triathletes from. And if you look at the U.S. girls, for example, I think they have now 9 girls in the top 50 or something, and that's such a depth of talent that they can recruit from that we simply do not have. Of course, there's other reasons for that as well. I mean, they're bigger and they have a different sports system, but they recruit so much strong swimmers that we simply cannot do. And so I always call it a bit, it's like cannibalizing yourself. We are cannibalizing our future short course success by, having them doing triathlon too early, which is crazy, because of course you want people in your sport, you want kids in your sport, especially regarding the fact that many kids nowadays don't do any sport at all, or spend too much time in front of the computer. So you want those kids to be active to do triathlon. But for a long-term career in short course, they said they often don't swim enough. And we try to attract those people via programs. Of course, many things happen on a club level, on a regional level. Laura Lindemann, for example, our best girl, she was recruited from swimming, and there it worked. But often, everybody is a bit wants to keep his talent to himself, even if a swimming coach knows that his swimmer won't be successful in swimming. Not really super successful. They often don't want to give them away to another sport and consider the loss.
Yeah, which is understandable in a way, because everybody's looking at their own interests. But it does make it different or difficult when you need to recruit from those sports, and they might have a really good chance to make it as a triathlete. Again, another switch of topic here. So I guess you work closely with the coaches at the performance centers that you have there, and are very familiar with the training that the guys and girls are going through at this time of year. So could you give a description of what the training for these short course athletes are doing, like a typical training week in January that we are in now as we talk?
Well, right now the German Federation has a decentralized system, so we have different training groups that do different things. at different times. Of course, I mean, some things are similar. One project that we did to professionalize our system is that we introduced a training data documentary. It sounds strange to everybody that is not so familiar with things, but we haven't had a training platform that we used. We used Excel sheets up to this year, and I was shocked, to be honest, when I came in and found out that we do not use any of those training platforms. Now we work with 2 days plan, and it started in November. So 1 year since I started with the federation, we have it. With the federation, everything's a little bit slower. But finally, we are there where everybody else was years ago. But now we're there, and it just started. So I have, of course, a better insight. It's not perfect yet, but I have a much better insight on what's actually happening. And it's obviously everybody is doing volume now or tries to do volume. But we have so many different types of athletes. Some athletes are prone to injury. For them, 20 hours a week is volume. They train a lot. Then we have athletes that do 30, that are right now in training camp in South Africa, and they do 35 hours and do the regular, 27 kilometers of swimming, 450 kilometers of cycling, and maybe 70 to 80 kilometers of running. Right now, we do not have any athlete that has the type of volume that the German golden generation did back in the day, simply because most of our athletes are rather young and are not in the main performance age that between 24 and 30. And most of our guys are younger and are simply haven't reached that level yet. So right now we do not have anyone that runs 3,500, 4,000 kilometers a year. We simply do not have anyone like that.
And in this phase of relative volume for what the athletes are used to, at least, and where they are in their development, do they also do a fair amount of higher intensity, or is it mostly just base endurance work? How does that intensity figure in?
Yeah, it's mainly base. I have about I have 19 guys and girls are in the national team, and they have about 8 different coaches. So some, as I mentioned earlier, are within the system, and some others are not. And so everybody has its own agenda. And I have athletes that need a lot of focus on, let's say, on sprints and technical aspects of very short intervals. I have athletes that are doing 95% base work. And with the big training group that is in South Africa right now, of course, there is some intensity involved, but maybe one session per sport per week, kind of the regular program. No.
Yep. Okay. That gives a good overview. And if you, knowing fully well now that you currently don't coach any of these athletes individually, you oversee sort of the program and the coaches. But if you were to still give an overview of your general view on training for short course triathlon, your coaching philosophy, if you will, can you give an overview? And knowing fully well that it's individual, you said that some athletes have a need for more speed, etc. So I know it's difficult, but try to give an overview and maybe a few examples.
Well, what we simply know is that every athlete that is on the top level at short course does a certain volume. And that's a volume that most of my athletes haven't reached yet. So that's something that is absolutely sure. A guy like Javier Gomez or the Norwegian guys. The Norwegian guys, by the way, how they're training. I mean, it's pretty easy to talk about them because they put everything on Strava. So whatever they do, that is quite similar to what the Germans used to be doing regarding volume and doing a lot of threshold workouts. That obviously that can be successful. That would kill some of my athletes, by the way. Some of the training days that they do, I've maybe one or two athletes that are physically able to train that without being broken down the next day. So it's simply, let's put it that way. We are in a process. I have some great talent, really great talent. And we've had some good development. I mean, girls like Nina Eim and Caro Pole, Lisa Terch, they have developed very well, but they're not first class yet. And one thing for sure is that they do not train enough yet, but they can't. You know, I can't have an athlete that does 800 hours a year, and then the next year you should do 1,200. So then he's dead. I mean, it has to be a gradual process, but we're in the process. And my job is to make sure that we follow the process. And I think we're doing that. Obviously more or less successful with one or the other athlete. But there was a huge improvement. And so we're working on it. And volume is a big issue. We have seen with some athletes that cycling volume is, some athletes try to increase the cycling volume, not only with my guys, but with some training groups, in order to avoid too much running, because that makes you, it's more dangerous regarding injuries. And we have, especially for some of my athletes that are prone to injury as well, I'd like to focus on that and use more cycling volume in order to create those aerobic base that is simply necessary to be successful.
Do you also think that the cycling, we talked a little bit about how the technical aspect has changed and the accelerations out of curves and things, but just in general, since the Brownlee brothers, as you mentioned, the cycling has become more aggressive, and you're more likely these days to see a breakaway that sticks on the bike, and simply the requirements to also be able to not just be technically proficient, but to put out solid power for an hour, that has increased in the last 10 years or so, and there is therefore a bigger emphasis or incentive to do more, focus more on the bike.
Yeah, that's for sure. And it's not, I wouldn't call it solid power for an hour, but to maintain those many accelerations, that was also an issue that we had with the federation. The training, especially the cycling training, I think that generally everything that we did about running was quite good, and a lot of emphasis on everything, on footwork and running volume and running speeds. So the whole federation was always centered about this because it used to be the kind of quality that you needed. With cycling, we weren't so proficient, and now we realize that the cycling training has to change, and some coaches from the German Federation obviously were aware of that quite from an early stage on. But I'm talking about the general direction, and we know that this is not sufficient. You know, you gotta be good with your intervals, things like lactate, clearance, VO2 max intervals, however you call it. Those things are a requirement. They are not an option. They're a requirement. And if you haven't done your homework in this area, then you won't be able to run afterwards.
Mm. And when you mentioned the volume that is required to be one of the best, what's the end goal, like a target sort of yearly hours for a top athlete? I mean, it's going to be a range, obviously, and each athlete is still individual, but roughly to what level do you think at least you need to get there?
I mean, I don't think that there are two opinions. It's between 1,000 and 1,200 hours that are required to do professional sport on the highest level. And you always find the one talent that doesn't have these requirements. I mean, I have Justus Nieschlag on the team, which is probably the biggest triathlon talent that I've ever seen. He's able to put out numbers with very, very little training that is simply amazing. His biggest thing was that he was always injured, and he has to find a ways to stay healthy. And if he has a fair amount of training, then he's dangerous. But unfortunately, he hasn't had one season where he didn't have any issues.
Yeah. So then obviously first order priority is to be able to go through that and get that consistency and build from there.
Yeah.
You mentioned some things about the intensity already, but can you describe a little bit more about how you think about intensity for these athletes? When and how should it be included, and how hard should you go? Do you have an opinion whether it's are you more of the polarized school, or do you like to do more threshold tempo stuff work and so on?
That is also individual. If you have somebody that already has I think with Training Peaks it's called aerobic power, the percentage of your VO2 max that you're able to use. If you have a guy like that, then probably a lot of tempo sessions won't do it. Maybe he has to increase his VO2 max. So other guys have no technical idea of going fast. I have other athletes that, have a physiology that is made for endurance. They are spectacular, but they don't know how to swim, they don't know how to cycle, and they don't know how to run, to put it brutal. They have no technical concept. How do I run fast? How do I swim fast? Where do I put the arm? And so for those guys, they have to basically to learn how to swim properly and to swim 25 meters fast. And when they can implement that, then they're going to be fast, because all the cardiovascular things that are required, they already have. So it's pretty hard. I'm not such a big fan of a lot of threshold work, because it makes you tough, but it also makes you tired. So I'd rather see them doing shorter intervals, like VO2 max things, but that's very, very general. It always comes down to the individual athlete. And what I've seen throughout all the athletes of the German team, that they can still use longer sessions. That's the general thing, not 6 sessions a day with 45 minutes or something, or 4 sessions or whatever. The sessions are quite short, and I'd like them to do longer sessions, at least at some stage throughout the year, in order to build up that aerobic base. And that's what's lacking, due to the fact that, you select fast feet, and fast feet getting tired when they have to do long sessions. And so too little long sessions and too short ones.
Okay, yeah, that gives a great overview. And one question again on the intensity is something that I ask a lot of guests and coaches. Do you think that when you're going to, for example, you're going to do your VO2 max intervals on the bike or on the track or in the pool, when you do, should you finish with a couple of reps left in the tank, or do you think that when you go hard, you really go until you can't do another one, basically, or until at least you're very, very tired? What's your thought on that?
Let's put it that way. If, for example, if you take a session that everybody likes to do, it's the 30-30s on the bike. 30 seconds hard, 30 seconds easy. And if when I spoke with one of my coaches, and I was like, oh yeah, you have to do that, and you do it 3 times, 7 times, so 3 times 7 minutes, 5-minute rest in between. So, and he said, my athletes can't do that. And I was like, whoa, why can't you do that? And then, they built up so much lactic acid. And so, why is that? So, have you looked at the numbers? So they were going all out at the first one. And then they simply would die through the set of 5 repetitions. Yes, of course you're dying if you do go all out. Yeah. That's not what's supposed to be happening. So of course there's a target, and if you request, you have to think about what's supposed to be happening. If you want to do a VO2 max durable, you know your athlete, and of course he gets a number that he has to hit and then to repeat. And if he cannot do it, then the question is, why was that the case? And that can't be all out if you do a VO2 max set. That just is not what it's supposed to be. If you're working on something else, like you want to increase your lactic acid build rate, then of course it has to be all out, and then you do longer breaks. So there's always the first is what's the aim of the session, and then what's supposed to be happening. And of course, if you're at the end of your session and you're done, you can't repeat another thing, then that's fine, because that's okay. And that simply means that you should fulfill whatever is on the schedule, because there was an idea behind it.
Yeah, that was the question, basically. Let's say you go to the track and you do 6 times 1 kilometer, and you are supposed to run them at 250 pace. Let's say that's the VO2 max pace for this athlete, and they get to their 6th one, they complete all of them at 250, but then they're absolutely completely done after that 6th one. They could not do another one. So the question is essentially, is that okay? Or because a lot of coaches, or some coaches, prefer that, well, maybe you should stop after the 5th one so that you could still do one more and have a little bit energy left in you. But you're saying that for you it's okay if you're absolutely done after completing the last one.
Now we're leaving a little bit the physiology, and we turn into psychology. So, for example, what's the incentive for an athlete? If you have your athletes doing 6 times a kilometer, and then whatever, one guy still feels like he wants to prove that he can run one more, and then he runs one in 240. Because they made a bet and whatever, then he might be able to do it. So that's something else that comes into play, is that if you do the perfect session, you improve your athlete, by a fraction of a percentage. If you work on his brain and you motivate him somehow, we're talking about percent. It's pretty simple. We have 5 guys swimming a set, whatever set you like, 6 times 200 in the pool, and they swim, and and after the 4th one, 3 hot girls in bikinis come onto the pool. Believe the 3 times will increase. That's for sure. That's happening because it's in their brain, and that they want to, attract and prove themselves and whatever. So, and you can write on the program whatever you like, but we are just if you have another incentive and you work on the brain, then you get another performance output.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. That makes sense. The other thing that I wanted to ask as well is how much does testing play a role, physiological testing and or even field testing in the program? And again, it's decentralized, so it might be different for different athletes, different groups, but just in general.
So, I mean, I think that the Norwegians are a bit already over the line, and too much data probably confuses you instead of it benefits you. But it would be crazy not to use the opportunities, at least some of the opportunities that you have these days. And most days, if you take a coach that has that is 50 years old and has 20, 30 years experience, then he knows the outcome of any kind of testing. He knows, even if they cannot use the scientific terms for a certain aspect of an athlete, then he knows why this guy's not as fast as the other one, or faster, or why this guy can do these things and another one can, simply due to experience and because he has seen so much. But having said that, of course, it's an advantage, if you have the lab to really make sure some of the things that you see in the field, and often or in 90% of the cases, it's just a reconfirmation of what you thought it was. But in order to be sure, and sometimes, you might have missed something, some aspect, so it makes sense. But, every test that you apply has strengths and weaknesses. And coaches in former times did a certain set that they would repeat, 6 times 200 swimming, do that every 4 weeks, 3 weeks, the athlete gets faster. It's a good test. And sometimes I do not care whether his aerobic power, anaerobic power, capacity, whatever has improved. I simply care about one thing in general, and that's, is the athlete faster or not? So, of course, it's nice to know why that is and what my training did, and to really check if I'm on the right track or not. But in the end, there are several ways that lead to success. And the most important thing in professional sport is that you are successful.
Yeah, that makes sense. And again, seeing as you have the decentralized system, do you think that there's a big difference between the different athletes and coaches in how they balance this sort of the art and the science of coaching? Like some are very much skewed to one side or the other, or are all pretty much balanced using both of those? Or how do you see that interplay and that balance?
Oh, of course, that has a lot to do with personal preference. I mean, if I look at the regional coaches, that are responsible for the different German states, then we have guys that haven't come from the sport, that are totally focused on physiology and testing and the whole scientific part of it. I've had athletes that also, coaches that also do not come from the sport, that have a very education-minded approach to it. They want to educate their athlete, educate them towards the sport, and maybe even an approach where performance isn't the most important thing. Of course, it's important, but not the most important thing. And others, we simply work with the experience. They have been athletes. They know what they did when they were juniors or athletes, and they try to apply that. So it's different. Some guys try to test each and everything all the time. And others are like, well, why should I test? Because I see them swim, I see them run, and then I know. So, of course, from a federation perspective, you have to make sure that there is a certain amount of testing is done. What we have is the testing in Leipzig, which is a requirement for every member of the national team twice a year to take part in some standardized tests there, lab tests. And this is kind of the core of our testing. But of course, I'd like to implement some more things because I don't think that this is very good what we have. But this is also a big effort. The athletes have to travel to Leipzig, and it takes 2 days. It's a lot of different tests, and sometimes you want to have an athlete do a simple lab test, where he's half an hour on the bike, and I see how the thresholds have changed.
Yeah. So would you say that the best approach still, like in general, is the approach that works simply, and that's different for each coach? Like for some, it works very well to be focused more on the science side, and for some, it works very well to be focused on the art side, and well, obviously not neglecting completely the other, but still there is you allow in the federation, you allow a wide range of the different where you can fall on that spectrum.
Some things we cannot order somebody to do. We can recommend a few things, and of course we recommend all our coaches, to make use of the scientific side of the sport and of the things that we provide, because it makes sense. And some guys have to be encouraged to do that, and others do it by themselves. And it's a bit. A couple of years ago, heart rate was like, why do I don't need a heart rate? And we had an age where all the training, when Polar came up in the mid 90s, all the training was heart rate monitored, and everything was in running, everything was on heart rate. But heart rate, of course, is very can be influenced by a lot of factors. And then at some point, athletes would throw away their heart rate monitors and say it's all nonsense. I still run. I run only by time. Or on cycling, I only have wattage. That doesn't make any sense. Heart rate is simply another tool I can use, and I don't have to get crazy about it, but I can use it, and that should be the approach. So I have all those data that I can collect, and most of the data will be some kind of a normal range, and the data is only there, to give me kind of a warning sign. So, I may have missed something because something's happening that's quite unusual. And in this regard, I think science has to be used, should be used. But for me, a coach is like a cook. You get a certain piece of meat, to put it in a brutal way. You have different ways to cook it. You have different ingredients, and you try to apply what you've learned, what you've seen, all the tools that you have in order to make it the perfect dish. Of course, it's easier to make a very nice dish when you get filet instead of cow leg. But still, if you have the right tools, you can do something very nice out of cow leg. So. And this is how I see it. It's kind of an art form, like a cook. You put this in, you try this, and you try to do this and that, all from your toolbox. But every coach has to have a good toolbox, and this is your education, your experience, and I think this is kind of this kind of is a proper picture.
Yeah, that makes a perfect sense. And with the same piece of meat, you can cook it in different ways and still get results as well. You can put it on a grill, or you can put it in the oven, and it might end up different but equally good. So, I like that analogy. Finally, a couple of questions especially for the benefit of the age group athletes listening to the show. What do you think are some of the most common mistakes that age group athletes tend to do and should try to avoid in triathlon?
Of course, one of the biggest mistakes is training on regular rides too hard, kind of always in that middle pace. 32.8 kilometers an hour in training and 33.2 in racing. This is one of the common things, and the opposite, or with women, often tends to be a different way. They often go so slow all the time; they never go hard. This is also an issue. Even when the pro ranks, women often try to do 30% more and are then tired when it comes to doing the hard stuff.
And any other advice? So not necessarily related to mistakes, but just general advice for age group athletes?
Well, volume is king, that's for sure, but quality of movement, that's also something that it doesn't make any sense to swim 20 kilometers a week if you do not know how to swim freestyle properly. If your technique has to be on a certain level in order to pump up the volume. If it's not, you'd rather work on the technique first and then pump up the volume, even if that may take time. And same goes for running. Most guys have an okay running style, but if there's some huge issue, then you'd rather work first on the running technique.
Do you think that if the running style is good, that it isn't necessarily beneficial to try to do small tweaks here and there, or like that might even be risky and cause injury risk? That it's mostly if you have any big issues that you should correct it? Or do you think that even if it's a pretty decent running form, that there might always be room for improvement? Because there are a few different schools of thoughts on that, so I wanted to hear your opinion.
Well, it depends. Every effort to change technique usually will, first of all, result in a loss of efficiency. And especially in running, as it comes so natural to you, you got to be very careful. And I'm not an advocate of doing forefoot running or whatever. Usually you should try to improve the style via, if it is at a certain level, via simply improving the fitness, the general fitness, and doing some drills. That usually is, if you watch how track and field athletes learn how to run, they do a lot of drills on a young age, and this is how they get a certain running style, a running form. And so, and bear in mind the realities of life. The average male European triathlete is about 80 kilograms. To turn him into a forefoot runner is injury risky. It's more about estimate how good, how bad it is, and of course some smaller improvements. Like what do you do with your arms can be applied, but of course that's something very hard to generalize. And you have to look at the individual and then make a decision. But I'm not a big fan of forcing everybody to run forefoot or something.
Okay, yep, makes sense. So let's start to wrap up and finish off with the rapid fire question. So take 15 seconds or less, and I'll repeat that because a lot of guests don't hear that the first time. 15 seconds or less to answer this. And the first question is, what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to triathlon?
Triathlon magazine, the German version.
And what's your favorite piece of gear or equipment?
My bike.
What bike are you riding?
An old Stork TT bike.
And finally, what do you wish you had known or done differently at some point in your triathlon or coaching career?
Doing more squats and less bench press.
All right. Thank you so much, Faris, for taking the time and sharing all your knowledge with us. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, and all the best for Tokyo and beyond with the work with the Federation and Germany's hopefully new domination of short course triathlon in the coming years.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I hope that you enjoyed that episode with Faris. I thought it was fascinating to hear his thoughts and especially things like how things have changed since he was active, what they did right, what they maybe could have improved, and what has improved in the 15 years that has passed since his victory in Hawaii. You can find the show notes for the episode on thattriathlonshow.com, and you can find all elite training episodes that I will tag this as well in the description of this episode in your podcast player app. We've had a lot of them recently with Philip Sipe, Craig Kirkwood, Ryan Bolton, and Dan Atkins, among others. So do go and listen to those episodes if you haven't already. But at the moment of recording this outro, I do not know who will be the next interview, but I'm sure it will be a great guest. So do subscribe to the podcast if you aren't already, so you don't miss anything. And of course, there are as well the Thursday Q&As that I know a lot of you listeners think are the most important episodes that you listen to. If you need any help with your training, whether you're a beginner trying to do your first race or your first race at a longer distance, or you're a very advanced athlete, age grouper, or professional, check out the coaching services we offer and ready-made training plans, if that is your preference, on scientifictriathlon.com. Big thanks to our sponsors, Precision Hydration, that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Take their free online sweat test to get a personalized hydration strategy for you, and get 15% off your order with the promo code ThatTriathlonShow15. And a big thanks to Roka that you can find on roka.com/TTS. That's where you'll get your 20% discount code for your order, whether you're looking for wetsuits, tri-suits, swim skins, goggles, high-performance eyewear, or prescription glasses. Roka has you covered. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.